What's the creepiest thing you've ever seen at night? Episode 1. Brakes went out on my car way out in the boonies, probably 10 miles from the nearest town and a few to the nearest house. I went into a ditch where I split my head open fairly good on the side window and broke my arm and a few ribs. So I'm in pain, it's pretty hard to breathe. And as it's circa 1997, I didn't have a cell. Nothing to do but start walking. It was a moonless, cloudy night. In other words, pitch, and I mean pitch black. I could only tell I was still on the road by the sound my feet made on the concrete. I couldn't see my hand in front of me. So here I am in the middle of nowhere, bleeding out of my head from a gash that went on to need 35 stitches, broken arm, broken ribs. Can't see my hand in front of me. And what do I hear behind me? The warbling call of a coyote. Then another, and another. Next thing I know, there must be 20 of them, and they sound like they're in a blood frenzy. Now, under normal circumstances, I could probably take a few coyotes, but I can barely lift my broken left arm, and even moving my right arm makes my ribs light on fire. So, I realize I am in a profoundly serious amount of trouble. Nothing for it but to keep walking. They're close now. Can't be more than 100 yards. Finally, I understand something clearly at the end of a house in the distance. I want to run, but I don't. I maintain pace. Walk up to this place, and with no amount of manliness in my voice, I proceed to bang very loudly on their door and beg for them to let me in. Finally, some old man answers the door, pulls his gun on me, and asks what I'm doing banging on his door at 2 in the morning. I got in a car crash, and there are coyotes after me. Please let me in so I can call for help. Guy grabs and shines a mag light back the way I had come, and sure as shit, had to be 25 to 30 coyotes. Seriously, if that house were another mile away, or if lost consciousness in the crash or on the road, I'd have been eaten.
My husband and I were on a road trip, coming back to Louisiana from Iowa. We would drive in 4-hour shifts while the other person slept in the back of the car. It was about 3 a.m., and he woke me up to start my shift. I looked around and didn't see another car in sight, or even a streetlight or building. He had taken an alternate route that he thought would be faster. Finally, we come across a small local gas station with a single light on. It was closed, and our car was the only one there. We pull over, and as I'm getting ready to open the car door so we can switch places, my husband tells me to hold on. I look up, and from behind the back of the gas station, a man wearing rags was shambling towards us quickly. Not quite running, which made it even scarier in a zombie's way. I told my husband to hurry and drive away. He was intrigued, though. He just stared ahead as the guy got closer and closer. I started freaking out and screaming for him to go until he did. As he drove away, I looked behind us until the gas station disappeared. As far as I could see, the man followed the car at the same odd pace he was walking at until I could no longer see him. It gives me chills big time.
Being chased by a bread delivery truck in the middle of the desert around 1 to 2 a.m. It was a giant truck that had no affiliation with anything other than saying bread on the side. I'll expand if needed. Edit. My friends and I like to climb at night. We lived in the middle of the desert. One day we decided to go venture into an area we hadn't been before, but was public land. There are a lot of random dirt trails. We drove around for a while until we found a great canyon. The moon was full and lit up the desert. It was serene and beautiful until it came time to leave. Mind you, there is no other light other than the moonlight, my headlights, and soon the headlights of the bread truck. It came down one of the random little trails hauling ass and stopped dead in its tracks when I'm assuming it saw us. It just sort of rumbled there idle for a minute or two, and we all just stood at the back of my SUV and peeked around to see if anyone was going to get out. Nope. They just sat there, waiting and waiting and waiting. After a few minutes of this, I got weird and decided we should leave. We piled into my SUV and started driving the opposite way down a trail. They turned that bread truck around and started following us. I don't know if any of you have driven down any desert trail that isn't monitored, but it gets weird. That bread truck was flying down the trail after us. I would turn down random trails trying to get away from them and go over a crest of a hill, but there it was, that generic truck right behind us. We drove around for a good half an hour or so with this truck just following us. Finally, I was able to get to the highway and sped off. It didn't follow. Back in the mid-'80s, I was camping with my parents and a friend next to the Columbia River in Oregon. It was at one of those KOA-type places my mom liked, but pleasant enough given that it wasn't overly crowded while we were there. My friend and I slept in a tent pitched next to the trailer, and were up really late one night playing Risk and drinking copious amounts of soda. Both of us had to go to the bathroom and decided to go up to the camp's facilities instead of waking my parents by using the trailer toilet. Everyone else in the camp was fast asleep, but it was really noisy due to all the frogs and crickets. On the walk up, neither of them was talking, and about halfway there the hair on the back of my neck started to stand up and I got this weird chilled sensation. My friend stopped and put his arm out to stop me and put his finger to his lips in a gesture to keep quiet. That's when I realized that there was no noise anywhere. No frogs, no crickets, nothing. I had this urge to bolt back to the tent, but it wasn't strong enough to actually get me moving. I looked over at my friend and he was staring up at the sky. I looked up too, and didn't realize what I was seeing until the stars started appearing off to my left, slowing appearing from left to right. It was as if something gigantic was in the sky, blotting out the stars, but with the way the stars were reappearing, it must have had a straight trailing edge. Imagine yourself holding up a big piece of cardboard above your head at night, moving it from left to right. It felt like that. No lights though, no color, no noise. Only the sensation of nothingness slowly moving off to our right. I don't know how long we watched, but by the time the stars had all reappeared up to the tops of the trees over by the river, the frogs and crickets had started to make noise again. We talked about what we thought it was before falling asleep and decided to keep quiet about it the next day in hopes of hearing someone else in camp talking about it, but hearing nothing. We stayed there for a couple more days after that, but nothing out of the ordinary happened. By the way, the weather while we were there was beautiful with no clouds or fog. It still creeps me out to this day, but at the same time fascinates me as to what it might have been. My dad is a judge in my small town. So growing up, I was raised to be cautious of people because some people didn't like my dad. Obviously, they were referring to people he put in jail. And so my parents always cautioned my other siblings and I to just be careful about where we played, who we played with, and being home on time. Typical parent stuff. And we didn't leave our neighborhood that often, so our parents and nannies kept a close eye on us. So one night my older sister is babysitting us, and my parents have gone out to dinner. Nothing crazy happened. We watched TV, ate junk food, and did the usual. It wasn't until later that night that things took a turn for the worst. It would be about 8, and I was in my little brother's bedroom. He was around for it at the time, so as the mature older sister I was reading a story to him. As I read, I glanced out one of the windows past my brother's head. I saw a man's face in the window. Needless to say, I freaked out. My brother turned and saw it too, and we made a dash for my parents' room across the hallway and screamed for my older sister. She came running, and I tried explaining what I saw. She was scared and didn't bother checking out the room for herself. She immediately called the police, and we locked ourselves in our parents' room. Lucky for us, she's the type of sister that locked the doors immediately when mom and dad left for dinner, so there was no reason to assume the man could get in unless he used force. The police came and inspected the house. They weren't able to find much, so the person must have hightailed it out of there. After they were done looking around, they asked me to describe the man. I only saw him for a few seconds because I was so focused on getting out of the room, but I gave them the best description that I could. They drew it up as I tried my best to recall obvious features. After that, my godmother came and picked us up, and we spent the night at her house. This was also the era where cell phones were not a popular thing, and we weren't sure which restaurant my parents were eating at, so calling them wasn't much of an option. So, my godmother left a note telling them to call her when they got back. Also, a police car stayed stationed by the house to inform my parents as well. The next week at work was a crazy one for my dad. It turned out the man that I described matched a description of a man that my dad had put in jail about 10 years ago, and his term was finally served. My dad also received a phone call from this man's sister saying that he had created a hit list and she was on it as well as my father. For the next couple of weeks, I saw police cars around my neighborhood more than I had in my entire life. They were constantly patrolling. My parents had a security system installed immediately and gave us all pictures of the man to keep, just so we would recognize him if we saw him. I'm not exactly sure if the police pursued it much further because my parents didn't talk about it, and I was so young that I didn't know what would happen legally to begin with. I also doubt they could pursue him based off of an 8-year-old's description, so it was most likely monitored but overall dropped when nothing came of it. About 2 years ago, I got a message on my phone from a high school friend I hadn't run with in almost 30 years. He told me he would be in town in about a month, just in time for the beginning of deer season, and was looking to go hunting. I called him back, and we caught up for a few minutes, and I gave him my address. He showed up around noon a few days before we planned to head out, so we talked of old times and the toll the years had taken on us. Before we knew it, we were loading up the Jeep, filling up on gas on our way out of town. Uneventful, we arrived on my 200-acre plot. I did a quick walk around to the Jeep before we ventured out on the trail to my hunting positions, checked the tire pressure, and soon we were in the blind, loaded and waiting. Over the course of 4 days and nights, sleeping under the stars, sitting in the blind, and tracking, we managed a 6-point buck and a larger doe. With the sun setting, the recently shot tied to my roof rack, and the buck which had been field strip packed with dry ice in the cooler, we were off. Creepy starts here. I was taking the trail out slow due to the darkness and recent rain, and soon it became apparent that we must have taken an incorrect turn as the ride and had taken about an hour, and we were going on 4. So, I stopped on a relatively dry piece of earth and pulled out my handheld gaps and map. After 10 minutes of the gaps being unable to find a lock, I handed it off to Jeff and pulled out the compass, placed it on the dash, and continued on towards what I could only assume was out. After heading in the same direction, taking what looked like trails, we were exhausted, the gaps were dead, and I was running low on gas. We laid back the seats as far as we could with the gear in the back and tried to sleep. I woke up to a loud crack and was faced with a man wearing tattered jeans and a t-shirt kneeling on my hood and a crack running the length of the windshield. With a subhuman howl, he swung again and put a spider crack in the passenger side of the glass. Scared out of my mind, I twisted the keys in the ignition and quickly realized I had left them in gear as we lurched forward. Without taking my fingers off the starter, I slammed my foot into the clutch, and as soon as the engine roared to life, I put my food to the floor and let the clutch out in an attempt to throw this man off my vehicle. Fortunately, I was successful and reached for my overhead so I could see where I was going and narrowly avoided hitting another similarly dressed man. I heard the distinctive crack of a large caliber firearm, which only made me attempt to go faster. Soon I was pushing 25 miles per hour on a relatively technical trail, skipping my smashed plates off of trees and taking out smaller ones with my stinger and large steel front bumper. Almost on cue, I saw the glow of a street lamp and heard my rear window shatter, followed instantly by the crack of a gun. I let nothing get in between me and this escape. I pulled onto what amounted to a small 2-lane paved path, grabbing gears. Not caring that I was still locked in 4WD, I hit around 60 miles per hour with every part of my Jeep screaming. I spotted a gas station. I pulled in and got her back in 2W, leaned against my Jeep, and began to fill it up, assuming I had left the crazies far behind. I was wrong. The pump clicked off, and I walked inside to pay and find out where I was to call the police. I made eye contact with the cashier, who was wearing a black t-shirt and ripped-up jeans. He said, "You still aren't welcome here." I turned and was back in my Jeep before I even realized what I was doing and left 11s across that parking lot, something I didn't even know a Jeep could do. I didn't know where I was or where I was going, but that didn't matter in the least. We needed to get out. I found the highway we had come on, Highway 57, and settled in, listening to the wind howling through the shattered rear window. That was when I remembered I wasn't alone in the car. Jeff was still fully reclined in the passenger seat. I shook him to wake him up, but I realized his eyes were open. He just shook his head and wouldn't speak to me. I drove past the house and straight into town as the sun was peaking the horizon and pulled into the local LEO station. I went inside and calmly requested to speak to an officer. After a few minutes, Officer Harris walked out to meet me. We shook hands, and I asked him to follow me out as I recounted my tale of the previous night. I almost don't think he believed me until he saw the shattered rear window and the bullet hole in the tailgate. He opened the tailgate and found the bullet had gone into our meat cooler. Soon we had almost a whole bullet. He took my report, the bullet, and a few pictures and offered Jeff medical assistance. He said something I will never forget. "They aren't real. They follow me everywhere. They hate me. They hate the real world. I didn't say anything the whole ride home, and almost as soon as we were back, he pulled his bags from my Jeep, and without so much as a goodbye, he left. Edit. The police told me the forensics on the bullet were inconclusive, and further that there was no gas stations called Joe's Gas Mart anywhere in Wisconsin or the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I was in my first semester of college, and I was in a relationship with one of my best friends from high school. I don't ever recommend. I used to spend the night in his house a lot, which his mom was not too fond of, but I did anyway. Let's call him Manny. Well, one night I'm at his house, and he wakes me up around 4 in the morning. I'm not incredibly happy, as I hate being woken up, but he asked me to lay down on his sofa on the other side of the road so his mom wouldn't see me if she opened the door. She leaves for work at about 4:30 a.m. I immediately moved to the sofa and fell back asleep, but woke up not too long afterwards because it was so uncomfortable. I try to reach for my phone so I can use the flashlight to get around and find my glasses, but it's dark and I can't find them. I looked at the alarm clock on the desk, and it was about 5:30 in the morning. Now, this is when things get weird. I looked up and saw my boyfriend lying awake on the bed at the time. He was lying on his back and playing with his phone. Even though it was dark, I could tell because he had his glasses on and the light from his phone was shining on his face and reflecting off his glasses. Manny, can I come back to the bed now? He leans up a little, looks at me, lays back down and back at his phone without saying a word. Manny, this is not comfortable. Can you check if your mom left? He leans up a little, looks at me, lays back down and back at his phone without saying a word. Manny, can you please get up? He leans up a little and repeats the same exact thing. When I find my glasses, I'm going to kick your ass. I try to search for where I might have kicked my phone and glasses for a few minutes and have no use. So, I look back up to ask my boyfriend to help me. Manny, can you? I froze. When I look back up, there is no one there. I try not to panic a lot, and frantically look for my glasses and phone with no use. I sat by the closet and started to shrivel. My boyfriend comes in a few minutes later and asks me why I was by the closet. He turns on the lights and immediately asks me what's wrong when he sees my face. Manny, you were just in here a few minutes ago, right? He tells me no. He's been in the kitchen talking and having breakfast with his mom for the past hour. I beg him to not be joking. This is serious, and that he knows I don't like this kind of thing. After I explained to him what happened, he said, I wish I could say I was joking, but I swear I was never in here. That afternoon, he told me about other creepy stuff that happened in his room. Never spend the night there again. I lived in Pennsylvania until I was 1 month shy of being 12. I know that exact date because you had to be 12 to hunt in PA, and I was looking forward to it. Anyways, we moved to Florida, and I got to hunt down here too, so that's okay. I had a few good friends that lived right down the street from me. We lived out in the country. My address was literally 1691/2_______ road. Middle of nowhere. So, we'd hang out at my friend's place, or we'd go up this hill for about half a mile until we reached the burn pile and cabin at the top. It really was a basic cabin. Outhouse. No lights. Nothing. We'd hang out there. Use it as a fort for Nerf battles, search CTF, etc. Well, one night my friend invited a few of his friends/cousins up to the cabin so we could roast marshmallows and play search. There was something like 13 of us to start, but the number slowly went down to 10 by nightfall. So we played search 5 versus 5 in the dark. Around 11 p.m., we were in the middle of a game, and 2 of my friends hung back with me because we were the fast ones. We realized that there were only 3 of us left on our team and that we hadn't captured anyone from their team. We tried to make a jailbreak and lost my friend. We'll call him F. It was just me and another friend that we'll call L. L and I were 100 yards from the other team, and they had 3 of our 5 players now in their jail. They began to press our side more and mess with us until one of them told us we were cheating. L and I looked at each other, unable to figure out why. Our side had about 1/4 of it covered heavily in trees. The other side was about the same, with both wooded areas near the back of the sides. At one point when we were chasing someone off our side, I saw L and I running in the same direction, and someone on the other side of L. I quickly cut behind L and intended to surprise the other person and nab them on our side. I was probably the fastest person there, and I didn't want to be on the team to capture nobody. Once I emerged from behind L's trajectory, we were both running. I saw absolutely no one. Nothing, no trees, no scarecrow, absolutely nothing that I could have mistaken for a person. I surmised that there had to be someone from the other team hiding behind our lines waiting for us to cross over and then tag us there. Well, the game ended up dwindling down to us with 2 left and the other side with 4. We capped 1 person and then all the parties were exhausted. I asked the other team, mostly L's cousins, who was behind the line waiting to cap us. No one claimed responsibility. I figured it was someone trying to mess with us. Back at the cabin, we start cooking hot dogs and marshmallows over a fire. We were all 10-13-ish, with one person being maybe 15, older cousin. So we were drinking soda and no beer. Note, if this had been beer and I'd been older, I'd just chalk this up to alcohol. All 10 of us were around the fire when we saw someone coming up the hill. It's hard to see outside in the dark when you've been staring at a fire for a while, but at least 4 of us have seen the person, so we figured it was one of the people who left coming back or someone new. After about half an hour, no one came up. We went and looked and found no one. Being the intelligent young kids we decided to investigate further. It's summer after 12 a.m., and we're out playing with fire and flashlights looking for a mystery person. Yes, we were not honor students. We went to the path that led down the hill and could clearly see my friend's house in the distance. They left the outside lights on for the dogs, and no one was in between. Someone was trying to mess with the group, so they ran into the woods and came out directly on top of us, scaring everyone. After we all changed our pants and regrouped, we headed back to the cabin only to see someone on the extremely far side of the clearing. There were 3 of us with flashlights, and all of us attempted to illuminate this person, but we were too far away to get a good look. As soon as we lit him, she disappeared into the woods. Okay then, now a few of us are freaking out. 6 people decide to go down to my friend's house to spend the rest of the night, where the axe murderer from hell won't be able to get them. Since they have 6, and the 4 of us who decided to rough it are only 4, the group of 6 got 2 flashlights. I was the only one left with 1. We decided to figure out who this was. L had an uncle who was only 10 years older than him, who we figured was just with us. We knew his place was less than a mile from where we were. Big extended family, large family plot of land. F, one of L's cousins, going to call him C, and myself began to walk across the clearing. Once we were about 40 feet from the edge of the woods, we could hear someone moving around in the brush. Not stomping or anything, but very carefully moving through the fallen sticks and underbrush, trying to make as little noise as possible. We figured it was L's uncle. We'll refer to him as Uncle J. So we split up again, and 2 people waited in the clearing, F and L's cousin, and me and L went into the woods to try to flush out Uncle J. We figured F and C could see okay from the clearing, and to be honest, they actually could. L and I eventually were about 50 feet into the woods, further than we thought we'd need to go, when we heard this low rumble noise. This is one of those times when I regretted trying to act macho. L and I kind of looked at each other to make sure it was neither of us rumbling and basically just stopped dead in our tracks. I shined the flashlight up in the direction of the noise, directly away from the clearing and the fire, and couldn't see anything. There was just nothing there. It was, to this day, one of the most eerie noises I've ever heard. Like a noise a Halloween decoration would have made, but real. We stayed about 50 feet into the woods, never venturing much further in, and searched the general area. Never find anything. After about half an hour of this, it's now past 2 a.m. We heard a noise just at the edge of the clearing, and both of us turned around. I had expected it to be F and C coming to figure out what was taking us so long. But instead, I see one person hiding halfway behind a tree looking at us. I've never wanted to shine my flashlight on something before that moment. If it was dark, I wanted to see what it was. But in the distance, well past the shadowy character, I could see F and C milling about by the fire. I had this awful feeling that there was no way Uncle J was being this creepy. I didn't want to see who it was, and I really just wanted to get away from this person. I mean, the hair on the back of my neck stood straight up. I must have seen it too, because he started slowly backing further into the woods. We moved in as wide a circle as we could around this shadowy person and managed to make it back to the clearing. We got back to the cabin and grabbed F and C and began to make our way back to Elle's place. When we were about 100 yards from the cabin, we heard its door slam, and we bolted. When we made it back to Elle's house near the bottom of the hill, we debated what to do. Should we call 911? Was that a trespasser? Or was that simply a family member messing with us? Elle went to notify his parents, who we figured would be overjoyed at the premise of being woken up around 3 a.m. by a bunch of sweaty, terrified 11-year-olds. They weren't home. Apparently, Elle's grandfather had a heart attack around 10 p.m. None of us had cell phones, as it was 1998, and so no one had been notified except for Elle's 19-year-old step-cousin. I never really figured out this relationship, TBH, who had drank himself near blackout drunk as soon as the adults left him in charge of all the younger kids up at the cabin. Seriously, he got dreamed the next day by basically every adult in attendance. That meant that Uncle Jay and basically every other of Elle's family members who could have been messing with us were at the local hospital with the patriarch of the family, who'd had a mild coronary. At 4 a.m., we knew sleep wasn't an option and began to watch and wait for the shadow guy to show up at the bottom of the hill. Less than 10 minutes later, I heard a sound coming from upstairs. The only problem is, there's no upstairs to Elle's house. There's someone, on the roof. Elle grabs his pellet gun, because that's going to be super effective, and we go outside, because, we're smart and stuff. We shine ever flashlights straight up at the roof, and see a completely black silhouette jump off the far side of the house in a mad sprint. The way Elle's roof was shaped, the part he jumped off of was over 25 high. There was a huge, vaulted ceiling in the back room of the house, and the roof was even taller to accommodate for the attic. We watched it run away from the hill and towards the creek, 10 foot wide, maybe 2 deep. And we followed it until we realized how much faster it was than us. Once it reached the edge of the creek, it stopped and looked back at us. This rumble thing came back, and it jumped the creek, and we lost it. The next day we told Elle's parents, and they informed us that the cabin was being torn down. A cow had been killed and dismembered in the cabin early that morning, presumably after we left. It could have been a panther. Cows weren't uncommon on that part of the property, but they tended to avoid the people. It could have been a bear, but we never went back up that hill at night. No way, no how. Never see that again. Might not seem like much, but to 11-year-old me, I had a new face for fear.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.